it came to me, I mentioned that I was in the mining business. And 3 or 4 of these guys lit up and immediately said, "What coin? What coin do you mine?" So, the band was this interesting fusion of rock, hip hop, kind of funk, soul, and reggae. Once I lost that dream, it took me a little while to figure out what was next. Not afraid to admit, looking back, I think I probably went through 2 or 3 years of depression. When I first took that role at Riverside, my mom looked at me and said, "Well, that's great, Joe, but look forward to you doing something that's good for the planet." I was concerned I was going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons that day.
In 2006, with the help of the late Murray Seitz, I founded a company named Riverside Resources. It ended up being a short stint for me as I resigned in 2008 and moved off to Hawaii for a sabbatical of sorts. Come May 2009, a young Jonas Lang joined the company in a business development role. Most who know us today wrongfully assume this is how we met. But ultimately, it was our significant others who introduced us shortly thereafter. Since that time, we've not only become colleagues, but very close friends. Jonas is what I would consider to be one of the most interesting people in the capital markets mining world today. A former star athlete in both baseball and basketball, a lyrically gifted vocalist, and owner of more hidden talents than I came to name, he's hardly your prototypical mining CEO. A job, I may add, he resisted for an extended period of time. More on that later. A director of American Pacific and now CEO of Canter Resources, and a recent first-time father, I'm pleased he's made time for us today. Jonas, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get started, how's fatherhood?
I'd be lying if I said I was getting a lot of sleep for sure, but I'm really enjoying it. He's 6 weeks tomorrow, so thrilled with the little man and can't wait to see who he becomes.
Yeah, it's the best thing. It really is the best thing. So we both played basketball, one of us at a higher level than the other. I'll let the viewer decide who that is. Talk to me about your basketball days. Do you still play now, or?
I do, not quite the athlete I once was as in my early 40s, but actually a funny story on that front. Just moved back from Toronto. I spent 10 years there, as you know. And to stay in shape, I was playing basketball with kids much younger. It was good chasing them around the court, and I've noticed I was developing some of these veteran, more experienced moves to gain an edge out there. We went out for beers one day after playing and kind of going around the table discussing what everyone did for their career or what they were doing for work. And when it came to me, I mentioned that I was in the mining business. And 3 or 4 of these guys lit up and immediately said, "What coin? What coin do you mine?" So, it just speaks to where that younger generation investor is, and certainly the education around mining. There's certainly a disconnect between the screen on our phones or the car that we drive and where those materials come from to this day. I think of it as going to the grocery store and buying a package of chicken. People aren't thinking about where that animal came from. And I think it's very similar with the products and things we use in the real world. People don't think of the mine that needs to be built to generate those products.
Yeah, I mean, if you use it, you either have to grow it or you have to mine it. It's one of those two things.
For sure.
Crypto, I mean, in many ways, it's eaten the junior market's lunch. I mean, the younger generation, as aptly described in your story, are much more interested in trading these crypto coins than they are stocks, which has been a real challenge, I think, for the junior sector in particular. Now, the question is, are they training the next group of junior investors that are going to move to stocks, or is crypto going to continue to be the next big thing?
I think reaching that audience just needs to be done in a new creative way.
Yes.
Gone are the days of sitting at a booth for 3 days straight waiting for elderly people that have known this industry and been gold bugs their whole life to come by and show interest. There needs to be a different approach and more education out there for that younger gen.
Well, they were elderly in the late 90s when I started as well, so they were probably mostly gone. The crypto piece is interesting. obviously a CEO of American Pacific, but I invested early on in one of these initial coin offerings. So I've actually transacted in the crypto space, and it was easy at the time. It was early on. This would have been 2017. It was easy to get your money in, somewhat challenging to get your money out, as my recollection. But trading it was very simple. A, the markets are 24/7, and B, there was a ton of liquidity. So it was very easy to trade, and you're doing it all on your phone with very, very minimal commission. So we can see why people like it. The challenge for the likes of us is now tapping into that group of investors and showing them those gains can be found over on this side of the fence.
On the theme of speculators, I think if nothing else, it's shown that generation that, money can be made quickly. I'm not so sure that they've measured and calculated the risks associated with it. It's been more of a momentum trade. But again, on speculating, that was the advantage I saw in the mining world. To borrow a sports analogy, the mining industry relative to the broader macro market is Division III field hockey or something. It's not very well known. There's niche businesses within it and sectors where there's definitely dislocated value and opportunity. So again, as a speculator, you look at this industry, you work hard, and you speak to people. It's a small network. New opportunities can be identified quite easily.
We initially bonded over our passion for this business. So let's start here. Best part and worst part of junior mining. You first.
I think the best part has to be the thrill of drilling for a new discovery. It's to me the most exciting part of our business. Perhaps that and rushing out to stake claims when you've found an idea somewhere on a belt that is open for staking. The most challenging or worst part of our business, well, Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with our best ideas. And certainly educating, I think, the broader public on the necessary commodities for our future. And we often get a lot of opposition to mining just with a broad painted brush that creates a lot of challenges. What about you?
I'll start with the worst part. I think the cyclical nature of the business is tough. Challenging when you're trying to raise capital once you have found something, or if you're in the process of trying to find something and you get in a terrible bear market. Also very difficult to keep good talent when there's not a lot of money. That's a real challenge. So I think that's probably the worst part from my perspective. The best part, it's a lot of good parts. Discovery for sure. I'll lean on my late dad for this one, who often commented, although he wasn't in the business, he would hear the stories of all the characters in this business. I mean, a lot of these people couldn't work at AT&T or TELUS. I mean, they're the real characters of what this business is. So I think that's probably, the people is certainly some of the best part. That lends me to this. Tell me a bit about your upbringing. Tell me about your parents. How does that mold who you are today?
My dad was a traveling musician when I was born, and he had to get a real job to help support me. Mom managed a local bookstore. Owe a lot to her for all the taxi driving between every sport I played. My dad as well, catching bullpen after bullpen as I was a kid, and can recall him finally calling it quits after taking a fastball to the face one day. So, a lot of inspiration from both my parents. I know when I was young, they moved to a neighborhood that was a bit beyond their means, really, with me in mind, to make sure I had more of an affluent surrounding and a chance at good education and all of that. So owe a lot to them for who I am today.
Yeah, nice. Lean into the sports a bit. You played basketball at a high level and baseball particularly. You went to college for baseball.
Yeah, humbling today. I'm certainly feeling a bit washed up in terms of my athletic adventures these days, but probably peaked around 17, 18 years old. Went down to California as a baseball pitcher on scholarship. Probably fondest memories on the athletic side would be winning MVP of the city championships in basketball, and I think my high point total might have been 51 or 54 points. Baseball, had a letter from the Toronto Blue Jays and Minnesota Twins before I went down to college, so that was really exciting. Ultimately, a pretty classic story with injuries that derailed the sports career. Not afraid to admit, looking back, I think I probably went through 2 or 3 years of depression. Back then mental health was not talked about like it is today. But it was challenging. That was my passion. I loved sports and dreamed of being a pro athlete. And, once I lost that dream, it took me a little while to figure out what was next.
Yeah, that makes sense. How fast was the fastball, and what were your favorite pitches?
Fastball, I think as a 17-year-old, I was throwing in the low 90s, which back then was a lot faster than it is today. I know pitchers today are touching 100 regularly. So favorite pitch was probably the curveball.
Yeah. What got you, from that point, you finish college, you have the injury, you stop playing, you then go to Royal Roads, am I correct?
Yeah, again, there was a 2-3 year period there where I was traveling, working very basic odd jobs, trying to figure out what was next. Yeah. I actually went to Calgary and went to college just to take a number of courses and try to find what I was passionate about again. Mm-hmm. I think it was my business and economics courses that started to inspire me again. I felt this connection the same that I had with sports, where there was strategy, working with teams on projects, competition, finding ways to, beat the competition, and that excited me again. And I felt a lot of that same passion I had for sports earlier on. So I went to BCIT, took the management program there, and then transitioned to Royal Roads to finish the commerce degree shortly after.
And so from there, how do you land in mining? How does that end up happening?
There's a few things. When I was working those odd jobs, I had a recruitment agency place me at a mining company for 4 days while they were down at a site visit. So that was my first exposure to the mining world. It was brief. I saw their excitement, maps everywhere in the office, and spoke to some of the executives that were talking up a new copper discovery. So that planted the first seed. When I was in college, I won't name drop, but I had a colleague there that was from a big mining family. I actually had a student loan. I didn't need all of the student loan. I needed about half of it to get through the year. And we started talking about mining stocks. The market was down, and I ended up using some of that interest-free money to invest in junior mining stocks. And they did very well. And from that point, I was kind of hooked on at least being an investor. Ultimately, it was our mutual colleague, Ben, who had been in the industry, who was visiting me in Victoria, and there was an opening at Riverside. And so I interviewed, and again, in terms of business, marketing, all of these different aspects, it felt like a good fit. Steep learning curve to start, but excited to still be in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And now, Ben, you played in a band.
I did.
Your House, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So talk a bit about that. Did you guys tour? You guys had... Yeah, I had the CD in my car from when Ben gave it to me before I knew you.
Right.
But talk a bit about Your House and that experience.
Yeah, it was, again, interesting time. Clearly, I picked all the most probable careers for success in terms of sports and music to start. But I was young, and, music, again, was a passion that was handed down from my dad, who still has a radio show today. The band was this interesting fusion of rock, hip-hop, kind of funk, soul, and reggae. It was really a 7-man jam band. We played initially as a hobby, for sure. But at the peak, we made a CD, and we were playing shows for 1,000 to 3,000 people, shows up at Whistler, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Ben's a great guy.
He is. Great guitar player, too.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's a pretty great guitar.
And he's better now today than he was back then. It's unfair.
Yeah. Well, talented guy, for sure. We're calling this the Speculators.
Yep.
Tell me, what was your sort of aha moment on speculating? You mentioned the student loan portion, but were there others where you just went, okay, this is for me?
Early on, I remember going to conferences, and, I was already compelled by the industry. And I remember sitting through a conference here at the Vancouver Hotel at the Fairmont. And a lot of these presentations were interesting. I wanted to understand how I could make money in a different deal. And I felt a lot of the presentations missed the mark. And I saw that as a big opportunity. The geologists are the gods of our industry, but sometimes when technical people try to explain why a layman investor should be interested in what they're doing, there can be a disconnect there from the underlying value to the opportunity perceived by that investor. So with that, I really identified an opportunity that if you could get a better understanding than the rest in terms of getting under the hood and understanding these projects and the opportunities, there was an opportunity to speculate on these different stocks and appreciate that in due time, they will be appreciated for what they are and the true potential.
What's one of the real challenges in our business is being able to explain why 14 meters of 12 grams gold means what it does.
For sure.
And I think that's one of the big challenges, and having people in the roles that we're in, being able to explain that in a compliant but also blue sky way. I mean, there is a lot of challenge in that.
There is, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a challenge, but also part of the opportunity.
Yeah, without doubt. This is the question I wanted to ask the most, and I'll preface this by saying, starting this idea of coming up with this series of interviews, I don't want to sit here and pitch American Pacific and same with Canter, but this one needs to be explored to a certain extent, at least from my standpoint, because I know you well, so I know the answer to some of these questions, but I don't know the answer to this. You declined the CEO role for numerous other companies. I know that because I made a couple of the offers myself. Why Canter? What was it that you saw there that you said this is the right time, the right asset? What was it that you saw in Canter that you wanted to take that role?
That's a good question. Probably, a collective number of things that fed into the decision, but I can't help but think back to when I first took that role at Riverside back in 2009. My mom looked at me and said, "Well, that's great, Joe, but look forward to you doing something that's good for the planet." Canter, going down to site, seeing the scale of the project and it being in the critical metals space, passionate about taking on an opportunity where we can build a project that really contributes to decarbonization and critical minerals and metals that we need domestically. So that was one reason. And the people, you mentioned the characters in this business, surrounded by a lot of good people, a lot of good shareholders. This is a challenging and inherently difficult business. So having the right people, the right commodity mix, ultimately were key parts of the decision.
It's funny you mentioned that story about your mom. I spent years outside of mining, as you know, kind of in the middle of my career. And I likely would have never come back if it wasn't for my mom. My mom was the one who at one point pulled me aside and said, you had so many good friends in mining and so many good times there. You should really look to get back into it. And that and Ken Cunningham were a big preference for the start of American Pacific. So there you go. This will be a fun one. Most memorable story in your career?
Wow.
That's
okay
good for an audience. Yeah.
For an audience.
Yeah. I know the ones that aren't already, so.
Fair.
Yeah.
Very early in my career, this one just pops into my mind. I can remember being very green. I'd maybe been on the job with Riverside for a month or 2 months, and I was down at a conference, standing at the booth, and the company had just launched a financing. And I knew who Eric Sprott was, but I didn't know him personally. I knew he was a very big strategic investor. And there was a coffee break at the conference, and I walked outside, and he was standing there in a cardigan smoking a big cigar by himself. And I remember thinking, I'm going to approach Eric. And I walked up to him with a little pitch deck and kind of shaking in my boots and said, Mr. Sprott, do you have a few minutes? And he obliged. We sat down on a bench as he smoked that cigar, and I flipped through pages. I think he could tell I was still pretty green in the business, but he ultimately cut a pretty sizable check into that financing. And that was an exciting, memorable moment early on in my career. Proved that if you had the guts to really go for it and go out of your comfort zone, that you could have success. Another one that comes to mind, maybe memorable for the wrong reasons, was down in Mexico on a big mine tour. We're touring some of the largest open pits in the country. And with Ben, who we spoke about earlier, we arrived into a small town in Caborca, and there was a buffet. I think the bus was late, and the buffet had maybe sat out a little too long. we ate some fish, and the next morning, certainly we were saying pinche pescado. It was challenging. We were rammed in these hot buses going down to the bottom of a very, very deep pit. And I was less concerned over the mineralization and the story of the pit and more focused on where the outhouses might be. Let's just put it that way. So that was nerve-wracking. We got through it, but I was concerned I was going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons that day. No bueno.
No bueno. No bueno. To completely switch gears now, if you were in charge for a period of time, what regulations would you like to see changed in this business?
You know, one that I couldn't help but think of just the other day was watching a sports game on TV and was just inundated with ads about gambling sites being promoted by celebrities, you know, targeting everybody. It doesn't matter your income level, who you are, gambling is for you. You know, and yet I know on the junior mining side, you know, we often do these private placements. There's pretty strict rules. You have to be an accredited investor, which doesn't necessarily mean you're a sophisticated investor, with minimum thresholds for how much money you have or, you know, net assets to even be able to subscribe to a private placement. You know, that's one I think that could be addressed, whether it's, you know, maybe it's a minimum or a maximum cap on the amount that they can invest, but private placements give an investor an opportunity to get warrants. It does not force them just to invest in the market. I know some incredibly brilliant, smart, sophisticated, even PhD level people that may, for whatever reason, not currently have the criteria to be accredited, and they're blocked out from investing in private placements. The shorting saga that's hit our sector is certainly something that needs to be addressed. I know there is some progress occurring.
The shorting saga is awful.
It's terrible. Yeah. It's a hard enough business.
Yeah.
What about you?
The shorting saga for sure, because it's predatory as well, right? Anytime you see these companies getting excitement, whether it be junior mining, junior tech, junior biotech, whatever it is, I've seen it numerous times where good companies are getting this opportunity to get a run in their stock price, and then they just get smashed by these predatory short selling groups.
And a lot of the regulation, if we, you know, the broker-dealer networks in Canada and the United States, I mean, they're essentially broken compared to what they were, you know, when I first entered the business. You know, and some of that red tape is necessary. We know there are bad actors in our industry, and there's companies that are not out to genuinely try to drive real value. That does occur, so there needs to be some regulation. But I think we've gone too far in that, you know, now for a broker to even go recommend a stock, the amount, again, the criteria for them to be able to do so becomes too cost prohibitive and challenging for a lot of new venture companies to reach that level.
You're spot on. There needs to be regulation, without doubt. The idea that, you know, down in the U.S. a broker can't call a client for any stock under $5, but anybody can put, you know, $20,000 on the Knicks to cover the spread, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's something amiss there. So that part has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. You're right, though, in terms of how the business has changed as well. I got into the business in 1999, and at that point, there were hundreds of brokers across Canada and down in the US that carried a book of business, that talked to clients directly about junior mining stocks, and there was a specific just junior mining investor as well. To me, that's all changed. Brokers don't typically pick up the phone and call on specific junior stocks. They're waiting for those inbound calls, unless it's private placements. And the just junior mining investor, to me, is a thing of the past, where people are investing in what sector is hot now. If tech is making a move, people are putting their money into tech. If biotech's making a move, they're putting their money there. If junior mining's making a move, whether it be gold or copper or lithium or whatever it is, they're investing in those sectors. It's not just somebody who says, I just invest in junior mining stocks. I think that's changed a lot. And that makes our job, you know, more difficult, where we have to focus on going direct to consumer.
For sure. And I think capital is harder to come by now than it ever was. I think where we're going to see this industry evolve and change is, yes, more creative ways to reach end investors, but also I think more M&A, more strategic investment from the producers. If you look at the past 5 years, the amount of exploration dollars that have been going in the ground, a lot of the majors have pulled back and only invested in brownfields exploration, right, around their existing operations. They used to have much larger budgets for new greenfields discovery exploration. The juniors have suffered through a really challenging, prolonged period in the market. So there's been fewer and fewer discoveries across most commodities, aside from a couple exceptions. And I think that's where we will see this next real commodity run. And the juniors that are able to raise money, that are able to consolidate and do good work in the field here, confident they will have a really good moment here in the market relatively soon.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, let's see that happen. Let's finish on this. Talk to me about your legacy. What do you, long time from now, but when people look back and say, Jonas Lang was, what is it you want to be remembered for?
I'll be honest, I haven't gone through that process yet of thinking that far ahead, but I'll start on the career side quickly. Personal is more important to me, but on the career side, I would love nothing more than to be a part of a team that wins the Thayer Lindsay Award one year at the PDAC. It's an award for the best, most significant discovery.
Galen was part of that.
Yeah, so I mean that to me would be very proud to be a part of a team. Obviously, I'm not a geologist or an explorationist, but to be a part of assembling the group, putting the deal together, to go make a truly meaningful, impactful discovery, that would mean a lot to me, something I strive for. On the personal side, just to be remembered for being authentic, unapologetically me, genuine, good husband, good father, and leave a great life for my new son, Hayden.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're well on your way to it. I'm going to read you something. You tell me who wrote this. Jonas has a brilliant mind and a humble heart. He is a genius in the old Roman sense of the word, meaning one who has found and followed his calling. That's from your dad. Well done. Real pleasure as always.
Thank you.